Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Build Your Copywriting Business. Kate and I are very excited today because we have a special guest. Hey, Rachel.
Hi.
Hello. We are so excited to bring Rachel on because Rachel is a professional bookkeeper. And we know that our copywriting students and probably just copywriters in general and freelancers in general can be a little intimidated by the numbers. You can get really excited about the possibilities, and the possibilities for working as a freelancer are fantastic. But when it actually comes down to tracking your income, setting aside money for taxes, setting aside money for health insurance or deductions, all that kind of stuff, I think that kind of intimidates a lot of people and gets them, maybe even keeps them from taking moves into or taking the step into freelancing. So we're very excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
Yay! So I think probably a great place to start would be to explain what is the difference between an accountant and a bookkeeper, and when would someone want to work with each one?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, great question. One that I get a lot. So I like to think about it like this. Accountant is like the umbrella term, like a doctor. And then within that, you have people who do different things. Like you have a heart surgeon and a general person, whatever, right? So accountant is the umbrella term. And then within that, there's different specialties. You have tax preparation is a big one. Audit is a big one. Your regular daily accounting or bookkeeping is one. Those are probably the biggest ones. And so bookkeeping is accounting, but it's a very specific part of it. And so whereas when you should use one, almost everybody, I believe, should be using a tax preparer. I know it's really popular to get TurboTax and do it yourself. And if it's really, really simple, maybe that's true. But usually by having a tax preparer, you save the couple $100 you spend a year by hiring them. So I really recommend everybody look into finding a tax preparer that they like to work with, especially if you're thinking about adding more pieces like being freelance and having income from multiple places. But that's kind of how I explain it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It definitely does. Yeah. And at the very least, having a tax preparer makes a lot of sense to me, because especially if someone is going from a full-time job to freelance, or even like adding freelance income on top of a full-time job, as many of our students do, there's just stuff that you're not going to know because you're not a tax preparation professional. Whereas, like things, deductions or any of that kind of thing.
Or even how to calculate your freelance income. This came in the group, I think, a couple of days ago, and I shared with them, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say, Rachel, about this. But the first year I did it, because I went from full-time to freelance, I thought you paid your quarterly taxes based on what you made that quarter. So in Q1, I looked back at Q1 and I paid what I thought I owed on Q1. And then Q2, same thing, when that's not at all how it works for a freelancer. And so I got whacked with I think I underpaid one year and got like a $3 fee, and overpaid and got like a $10 fee. And so they weren't huge. I think, a lot of folks are very scared of doing it wrong. And then I think the IRS coming down and chasing them. So I don't know if you deal with that with folks, or if you have reassurance that, I guess what's the worst case scenario?
Prison.
If you're making a good faith effort in doing it, yes, you could get audited. The worst case is that you just ignore it and don't file your taxes and then have to pay years and years and years of back taxes. That's like worst case. But
don't do that. Pay your taxes, everyone.
But if you're paying attention to it and that you're trying to get it in order and you're making a good faith effort, you're fine. And I know it is very intimidating, but that's normal. Don't feel like you should have all of the answers, because all of us start our businesses and there's blind spots, whether it's marketing or sales or HR or finance. All of us have those areas that we've never been trained in. So don't expect that you should know it. So yeah, I would say try not to freak out about it too much. As far as like the estimated tax portion of it, that's really just what they are, is estimates. They're gonna adjust it at the end of the year. There's probably gonna be some interest. You're probably gonna guess wrong. Like I would say definitely don't try and sweat that too much. Just make payments so that you're keeping up with it, but you're never gonna guess perfectly what it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And remind me, because I might be getting this wrong because I've been doing this for a while, but the first year that you're freelance, you don't have to pay estimated taxes. After that, you have to pay estimate. How does that work again?
If you have a lot of extra income coming in that you're not, so basically you're paying taxes because they're not withholding it on a paycheck. And it really, I think, depends upon how much, which is why it's really good to have a tax preparer to say, hey, can you look at my tax situation and let me know if I should do this or if I shouldn't. A lot of times the first year, if it's not that much, maybe it doesn't make sense to do it. But if you're starting right now and you're like, I'm going to make $100,000 this year as a copywriter, you probably want to think about doing it because it's a big first year, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That makes a lot of sense. Well, and it just even having someone to be like, so this is how much I think I'm going to make. Can you even just give me an idea of how much I should be paying and all that kind of thing? We talk about setting aside a certain percentage of every check that you get in, or okay, it used to be checks. When I was starting out, it was only ever checks. But every payment that you get from a client. And we talk about setting aside somewhere between 25 and 40% for each one. It's setting it in a separate account. Is that kind of in line with what you recommend to your clients?
I think that's a good starting place. Yes. And it really depends upon your entire tax situation, where you fall within that. It could be as low as 15% if you have a lot of expenses and other things going on. But yes, absolutely setting aside money for taxes, either from every check, or if you look at it once a month as a whole and set it aside, absolutely, because then you're not surprised at the end of the year with a big tax bill. So
yeah, I've definitely known freelancers who are like, I'm going to set that aside later. And then April 15th comes around and they owe like $30,000 to the government and they don't have $30,000 in cash on hand. Yeah.
It can be a big chunk. Like if you don't have a lot of expenses going out and it's all income coming in and you don't have a lot of other things going on in your personal life that affects the tax situation, it could be 30, 40%. So you definitely want to be setting that aside so you're not surprised.
Yeah. And personally for me, I've never minded setting aside a little bit more because, and then in the don't touch it tax account, because then after when I'm paying my taxes, if there's a little extra cash there, then great, right? Like a little present to myself. Yeah. Well, so what would be some, so I'm single, I have no children, I do have a mortgage, but what are some of the other considerations that might affect that tax rate? Something that a tax preparation professional would be able to help them with?
I mean, there's so many things. It depends, right? Like your spouse, if you have a spouse and what they make. What kind of deductions you have, what your other income sources are. Like basically anything that can affect your tax return can have an effect on it. Also, if you have anything big happening, so like my husband and I sold one of our properties this year and it's having a huge impact on our taxes, and that's a one-time thing. So if you have big one-time events, also you might want to talk to your tax preparer and say, hey, is this going to affect stuff? Like, how should I plan for that?
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So how do you recommend that people track the money that's coming in and the money that's going out and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And there's a lot kind of to that, but my number one thing is no matter what you do, please set up a separate bank account for your consultant business and all of the money related to that. Put everything that's coming in, right into there. If you have any expenses directly related to your business, have it come right out of there. And then when you pay yourself, transfer it from that business account to your personal account. Don't mix the two as much as possible, because that makes it so much easier no matter what method you're using to track all of your finances. So please set up a separate bank account just for your consulting business.
And to clarify, to have you clarify too, because I think some people ask if, can my client make out a check to me versus my business? But you can open a separate account for your business under your name, right? And you don't have to do it under a business name.
Right. As long as you have a separate account. And it depends how you're set up. Like if you're set up as a sole proprietor and you're just doing it under your name, just set up a second account under your name and use that for business. Like you're personally designated it. It doesn't have to be It doesn't have to be the account type of a business. Just make sure you're using a separate account for it. If you do have an LLC, you're going to want it to be probably in the name of the LLC, but you're a signer on it. So like that shouldn't be an issue. If they write a check out to you and you deposit it in there. Does that answer that question?
Yeah. Well, and the vast majority of our students, if not every single one of them, is a sole proprietor. So yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah. Just open a separate checking account. It doesn't have to be a business type. If for your purposes, it's your business.
Yeah. Perfect.
For sure.
Thank you for clarifying. And then sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to continue with that.
Yeah. Perfect.
So like, that's number one. If you take nothing else away from this, please have a separate bank account. Actually, for freelance type work, I generally recommend just using a spreadsheet. Honestly, QuickBooks is amazing. We use it for ourselves, but it's not as easy as just learning a software, because there's a lot of accounting principles that go on behind the scenes. Your accounting is like a giant math equation. And if you don't know what you're doing, how it affects that math equation, it's really, really, really easy to screw things up. So
that would be me. I would definitely screw it. If I were in charge of dealing with all that stuff, no.
Yeah. So really, you don't need it if you're a freelancer. If you ever get to the point where you're dealing with sales tax, or you have a lot of loans coming in, or payroll, like if you hire somebody and need to deal with payroll, then you might want to consider something more robust and actually getting assistance with it. But if you're doing it yourself, set yourself up a spreadsheet. And every month, most banks, you can go in, you can download a spreadsheet of your transactions, copy it into the spreadsheet, categorize it, and then you can get totals from your spreadsheet, like using a pivot table or something, and you're good to go. That's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's when people start a business or when they start freelancing, there's the temptation to be like, well, I need this software because this makes me professional, or I need this software. And often or not often, but it's really easy to spend a whole lot of money on software that isn't actually really buying you anything in terms of either ease or in terms of time.
Absolutely. There's some that you might want to use, but choose your tools carefully. That's what I've learned. There are some things I know, I'm never letting go because my proposals and invoices look beautiful, but there's other things that I don't really use that. And, QuickBooks is one of those. It's more than you need if you're a freelancer.
Yeah, I think
softwares, right? There's a lot of them out there, Xero and Wave, and CRMs have stuff built into there, but you're going to have more headaches and manual entry doing it that way than just downloading your bank transactions and putting them in a spreadsheet once a month.
I love that.
Yeah, that takes the ease, or I should say, it takes the worry out of, I think, a lot of that tracking for people. It's just document.
Exactly, and it's easy, and that's also why you have a separate bank account, because then everything is right there. It's in one spot. You have to go to one spot and download it into a spreadsheet. It's easy.
Exactly. I love that.
At what point do you think freelancers need to use a bookkeeper, or at what point should people start coming to a bookkeeper?
I think it's kind of different for everybody. first of all, if it's a pain point and you're just not going to do it and it's a huge stressor to you and it takes you 3 hours to do it because you hate it so much,
Yeah.
like then it might be worth it for you to work with somebody. But otherwise, I think it's when you get to those points I talked about before. If you're looking at expanding your team, like adding to your team, whether it's contractors or you're having people on payroll or something like that, if you ever get into products where you have to deal with sales tax, those kind of decision points where your business gets more complicated, if you're moving essentially past being a freelancer, that's when I think it's worth talking to somebody. And when you are like, avoid the temptation just to like have a VA or an admin or somebody like that, or somebody on your team. Never have somebody on your own team doing your finances. That is like, it's a bad idea. You want separation of duties. You don't want their fingers in your finances.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there that'll do it for, 15 or 20 bucks an hour, and they usually don't know what they're doing. So
well, it's the same thing with copywriting, right? Like we hear from, you're an entrepreneur too. So you hear people say like, oh, I'm just going to have my VA do the copywriting. Like, no. If your VA could actually do copywriting effectively, they would be happy because they'd make a whole lot more money. And it's the same thing with bookkeeping. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Bookkeeping is more than data entry. Like I talked about the giant math equation before. It's a specialized thing, and you want somebody who knows what they're doing if you get to the point where you need to look at it. So for sure.
Now, as a freelancer without staff or without additional considerations, is there still a level where that would make sense? I mean, you talked about if it's a pain point, if it makes you crazy, but is there a certain level, if once they hit 100K, is that when they want to start bringing someone on as a bookkeeper?
Yeah.
Or
I would say, somewhere between 100 and 200. I like, for myself, my goal as a business owner is always to be figuring out what I don't like to do and outsourcing it.
Yes.
And you can do that when you first start. Like you can't pay all the people because you're not making enough. But as I get to the point where I can afford to pay somebody this, it's off my plate. That's what I would say. Like make a list of what are the things you least enjoy in your business and prioritize what order you want to get them off your plate. And once you're making enough money to get it off your plate, get it off your plate.
I love that. I love that philosophy. And I think too that I will make a generalization. I actually happen to really enjoy numbers and running numbers, but I think a lot of writers love words and don't love numbers in that same way and are intimidated by that and afraid of making a mistake. So it would seem to me that, bringing on a bookkeeper or working with someone sooner than later could alleviate a lot of those nerves and a lot of those, oh, I don't know what I'm doing and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. Because having somebody in your corner, it does a lot of things for you, actually. So it keeps you accountable. It's a very real temptation when you're doing it yourself to push it off. And then, we have a lot of people reaching out to us right now, or February or March. Like, I need to get my
a little late
for all of us.
I was gonna say, I hope March for next year now's the time to reach out, right? To you for next, or for, I guess for this.
Now's a really good time to start, actually, because we can start clean with 2021. Going back and doing a bigger project. But it keeps you accountable to get it done every month. But then there's also something about getting those reports and seeing them in black and white. Like you can see your progress from month to month and how much you're making and how much you're spending, and it gives you more insight and clarity into your business by looking at your numbers regularly. So and then we know what we're looking for too. Like if we see something weird or we know it shouldn't be there, we can clarify, and we can, you have just a more tighter, better set of financials than if you were trying to do it yourself.
Yeah. Well, and to have a resource that you trust for questions too, I mean, I'm sure you get people every day who are like, well, I Googled it and it said this. And you're like, no, that's wrong.
Right. I always joke. I joke with my husband because he's an IT guy. And he's like, most of IT is just Googling. And I'm like, but you know what to Google for and how to look at the results, right?
Yes.
So yeah, absolutely. Just having somebody who knows what they're looking at is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much, it's complicated information. Even if you find the right answer, it's buried in.
Not always easy to understand. I mean, I sent an
No.
IRS document for the how to estimate your taxes to someone. I'm like, I understand that it took me 5 years of reading it multiple times to finally be like, oh, this is how I do this math problem, which should be straightforward, but the language isn't. And so I'm curious for you, because you had a great blog, the Tax Prep Myths blog, which we'll link to in our show notes for folks.
Oh yeah.
Loved it. Yeah. What kinds of things, like deductions, do you feel are often overlooked by freelancers? Like what things are they just missing?
Sure. I think the biggest ones that aren't hard costs are mileage, which maybe not this year so much, but mileage and a home office, or they try and deduct things that are crossover between personal and business. So like for your home office, for example, the easiest way to do it is just a square footage. But the caveat is that you use it exclusively for business. And that's hard for people to do sometimes. Like they have an office and they use it for personal and business. So home office is one that you should definitely like talk to your tax preparer about, because it's not a physical amount you spend. It's just like a deduction you can take, if that makes sense. Mileage is a big one, but again, that's one that you can't guess at. You actually have to track it because it's a huge flag for auditors.
Yeah, I remember having a notebook in my car and being like, okay, 51,379. And yeah.
Exactly. I think really the biggest way people miss deductions is because they're not keeping their business separate in a separate bank account. So if you're scrambling and you're going through all of your personal checking and your credit card because all of your spending is all over, it's so easy to miss.
It's awful. And it takes hours too. I mean,
hours. Really, guys, get a separate bank account.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, would you recommend, if you have a separate bank account, would you recommend, like, if you purchase things on credit card, like, would you recommend, like, if I need a printer for my office strictly for business purchases and you want to put that on a credit card, would you say, all right, get a separate credit card? It doesn't have to be a business card, but a separate one just for business expenses.
Yeah, a separate one. I would say just get a debit card if you don't have it happen that often. And the points aren't worth it, because you're going to spend so much time like going through your other accounts and figuring it out. If you do a lot on credit card in your business and you think it could be worth it, then yes, a separate one. But then you have to pull that information to track all of that too when you're doing your little spreadsheet.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. And then two, so some of our students get payments from their clients directly into PayPal. Would you recommend that PayPal just automatically send it to the account, or?
Yeah, so PayPal is a beast. So PayPal is really technically a bank account because it holds a balance. So again, if you have PayPal and you're using it for business, have a separate PayPal that's just business. Because otherwise, again, you're wading through stuff, and like if a payment comes in and then you pay something personally, it takes it out of that, and then you only have part of that payment sitting there, and then it's a nightmare sometimes. So first of all, avoid PayPal if you can, but if you take a lot of it, have a separate PayPal account, and then try and keep the balance at zero, like keep transferring it back and forth between your business account. Because then if the balance is at zero and it's all business, then you know that you've accounted for it all in your regular checking.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Advice.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what I do. I try to keep it. Don't make purchases with my PayPal. That's what's now that way it's all just business stuff and it goes directly to that account. Yeah, that's a great reminder, because I forget how easy it is to just be like, pay me a PayPal, and then bye money.
There have been times when I've clicked a button and not realized that I bought via PayPal. I thought I was buying via something else, and surprise. And if your business PayPal is automatically linked to it, then you have to go back and figure all that out.
So if you have, like, it's a lot easier if you only have it one way, like you only use it for money in or only use it for money out. If you use both, like, you just have to really be diligent about it. So like when you pay something, make sure it's pulling from your business bank account every time. And when you get money in, transfer it over right away. And like really try and keep it at zero.
That makes a lot of sense. When we talk too about having a regular schedule to, maybe it is every Monday you go in and just make sure your PayPal account is at zero, or, and then after that you go in and you check, make sure your invoices are accounted for, and make sure you've accounted for any money, put it in your Excel doc, any money that you've gotten in, all that kind of thing.
Yeah. Getting into a rhythm is key, because especially if you don't like to do it, because then it'll build up and it'll get bigger. And then you'll have a bigger project. And then all of a sudden it's going to be February and you're like, crap, now I need to spend my entire weekend like trying to do it. So
yes.
Yeah.
That is me. I should say I have been in previous years when I was just working as a freelancer, aside from this business, I was definitely a put it offer. I would wait until like, okay, I have to get this all together because I have to pay my taxes soon. And I would have to block off a weekend. And when you say weekend, it is truly that amount of time to go through all of your receipts, and the receipts that you have in your inbox, and the physical receipts that you have, and the invoices, and tracking all that stuff down. Yeah, it's so much better to just stay on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, make an appointment with yourself once or twice a month and make sure you do it. And honestly, it also helps you catch things sooner, right? So you talked about invoices. When you're doing it, you should review your invoices and see if people haven't paid you. Because if they haven't paid you, that's not cool.
And don't wait till the end of the year. I did that once where I was like, oh shoot, I highlight it in bright yellow in my Excel sheet so I can find it, but I'd missed one from like July that never got paid. So come December, I'm like, hey, client. And yes, it was their fault that they never sent it, but it was also my fault for not catching it for months.
Yeah, because sometimes things get lost in the shuffle. Like it's probably nothing malevolent on their part. It could have gotten lost in cyberspace or whatever, right?
Exactly.
Just, a lot of times, just a simple email will be like, oh yeah, I'll get that paid.
Yep. 100%. I love that. I had good intentions. I can't believe it's 2020. I still have the doc on my computer. I'm like, I'm going to track my deductions and then, I bought a new iPhone. Like I can do some of and by like March it was done. But so having those automated reminders on the calendar, I'm doing that right after this call, setting a monthly reminder, track it.
Perfect. Do it.
I mean, we all think like, oh yeah, I'll remember. That's such a big thing. Like it gets pushed because there's no.
Well, and you guys know when you go out on your own, there's a lot of things that are coming at you that you're not used to dealing with, because it ends with you. You don't have a boss. You don't have your nice, neat little job description at your regular job. A lot of random stuff comes at you and you get pulled different ways, and you have new clients who want things, and it can get chaotic. And you need to learn how to manage the calendar and the important things to make sure they get done. And all of us go through it as an entrepreneur. Don't feel like, it's spiraling because of something you did. It's just a lesson all of us have to learn, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly true. When you're servicing clients, your own business often takes the backseat. Like we'll talk to our students, but you have to regularly update your portfolio. Otherwise you'll never do it. You have to be good about, we focus so much on providing the service, and even sometimes we'll put off sending invoices to our clients, which is so crazy. But there's that element of like, well, I have to, do this work for my clients. And then your own business ends up taking a back seat.
Exactly. And I like to, when I'm talking to clients or other, networking contacts, I like to get grounded a lot. Like, why did you do this? There's a reason that you went out on your own and started your own gig, right? And usually it's twofold. It's one, because you love what you do and you love the service and you love getting a good product. But there's always a financial and personal dream involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so keep that why in the forefront as you're thinking about these things. Like, you don't make money unless you actually invoice. You don't get to that personal dream and why you started the business unless you make your business a priority and do a lot of those things and schedule time for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not a business if you're not making money, and
Right?
if you're not paying your taxes, then you're just an expensive hobby.
And it doesn't matter how much money you make if people don't actually pay you and it goes in your bank account. Like, you're essentially working for free if you don't invoice and make sure that people following up on it, that people pay you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think too, just come tax time, thinking of all the opportunities that are there. I'm looking at my office chair and I realized I had bought it. I was like, oh, this stays in my office and it's only my office. This is something that can be a deduction. Like, so taking that time to look through everything and find those things that I wouldn't have found. This is a pricier chair. Like, it helped get that taxable income down a little bit.
Yeah, look through it. Like, this is something I do and I know better, is like, I order something on Amazon for my office and forget to change the card because it's my personal, right?
Yep.
It's connected to personal. Yeah. It's easy to do and like, oh, I should have written that off. So when you think of those things, like, make a list, go back, find it, note it on your spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I love that. That makes so much sense. I so grateful that you took the time out of your busy day to answer questions, because I know that our students are going to find this students and listeners and viewers are going to find it so valuable. If people have listened to this and they're like, Rachel knows her stuff, how do I get in touch with her? How do I work with her? How can people find you?
Sure. Go to my website. It's masterpiecebookkeeping.com. It does a pretty good job of laying out what we do and how we do it. And there's a contact page on there. You can find me right there.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll definitely, so it's Masterpiece Bookkeeping, and we'll also put the link in our show notes so people can get it quickly and easily. Yes.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, Rachel, thank you so much. You have answered all of our questions, and I feel like I have got a good refresher, and Kate's got some action steps.
I got some action steps.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Setting that reminder.
Well, great. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who watched and listened and were a part of the conversation. I think
hopefully feel less anxious about tax season.
I hope everybody feels pretty good after this episode. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Make sure you don't miss any tips, tools, or tactics for copywriters by clicking subscribe right now. And of course, you can always find us over at filthyricwriter.com. We'll see you next time.